In San Diego's Old Town, where visitors now stroll beneath the warm sun and the scent of food drifts from open-air cantinas, there stands a house that seems forever out of place. Its white brick walls and green shutters appear neat, almost charming, as if inviting passers-by to step inside. Yet the longer one looks, the more the charm turns uncanny. The windows seem too still. The air around the house a touch too heavy. Something about it refuses to blend with the life that hums around it. That house is the Whaley House. Built in 1857, and for more than a century and a half, it has been whispered about as one of the most haunted homes in the United States. But the story of the Whaley House does not begin with bricks or mortar, nor even with the Whaley family themselves. It begins with the ground on which it stands, a plot of land that was already cursed long before Thomas Whaley ever laid eyes upon it. In the early 5048, San Diego was still little more than a frontier town, rough-edged and unforgiving. Justice was swift, and punishments often carried out in public where the entire community could watch. This very patch of earth was used as the site for executions. The gallows stood here, and those who had crossed the line of the law were brought to meet their fate. Crowds gathered, men, women, and even children, to watch as sentences were carried out. The dust rose, the ropes tightened, and the condemned swung before an audience whose chatter and gasps filled the hot California air. Among those executed here was a man whose name would become forever bound to the Whaley House. James Robinson, better known as Yankee Jim. Robinson was a tall man, broad-shouldered and rough around the edges, accused of attempted grand larceny after trying to steal a boat. In another time, in another place, the crime might not have warranted death, but the law was harsh, and Robinson was sentenced to hang. On September 18, 1852, the townspeople assembled at the gallows. Yankee Jim climbed onto the back of a wagon, a rope tightened around his neck. But the execution was botched. The rope was too long. When the wagon moved, Robinson's boots touched the ground. Instead of the clean, quick snap of the neck that was expected, he dangled awkwardly, his feet scraping against the dirt, his body twisting as he fought desperately for breath. It was a slow death, cruel in its prolonging. Witnesses would later say that his gasps and convulsions haunted them long after the body went still. The crowd eventually dispersed, but the land held on to what had taken place there. Yankee Jim's death was not forgotten, and neither, some believe, was his presence. Just 5 years later, a man named Thomas Whaley stood on this land, envisioning something entirely different. Born in New York, Whaley had come west in search of fortune. Ambitious and determined, he saw opportunity where others saw misfortune. The superstitions about the land meant nothing to him. To Thomas, this was the perfect location to build a home, a store, a life. In 1857, he purchased the lot and began construction on what would become the first brick house in San Diego. The home he built was more than shelter. Crafted from bricks produced in his own kiln, it was a declaration of refinement and permanence in a town still struggling to establish itself. Designed in the Greek Revival style, the two-story structure boasted clean lines, tall windows, and a dignity that set it apart from the rough wooden buildings around it. The Whaley House quickly became a source of admiration. It was not just the home of Thomas and Anna, but a centerpiece of community life. Inside, the rooms were filled with activity. At different times, the house served as a granary, a courthouse, and even a theater. The parlor hosted gatherings, music, and laughter. It was a place of ambition, built to be a cornerstone of San Diego society. Thomas was proud of what he had accomplished, proud that his family lived in a home that stood as a symbol of success. For a while, life seemed promising. Thomas and Anna raised their children within those walls. The house echoed with footsteps, voices, and the bustle of daily life. To the outside eye, the Whaleys had built not just a residence, but a legacy. But the ground on which they had built carried its own memory, and that memory was dark. The first tragedy struck in 1858, just a year after they moved in. Their infant son, Thomas Jr., only 18 months, died from scarlet fever. The loss devastated Anna, who sank into grief. The laughter of a baby had been silenced, leaving behind a void that no words could fill. The family buried him, but sorrow clung to the house like a shadow. In later years, visitors would claim they heard the faint cries of a child within those same rooms, as though Thomas had never truly left. Still, the family pressed on. Life demanded it. The house continued to stand, continued to be a hub for the Whaley's enterprises and a gathering place for the community. But whispers had already begun, murmurs that the land was cursed, that Yankee Jim's spirit paced the very floors Thomas had laid. Guests spoke of footsteps on the stairs when no one was there, of a heavy presence that seemed to move through the halls. Some even claimed to glimpse a figure, tall and shadowy, lingering near the staircase, as though reliving those final moments of dangling in the noose. The Whalers dismissed these stories, or at least they tried to. Thomas was a man of reason, unwilling to bow to superstition. Yet even he could not completely ignore the strange atmosphere that seemed to settle over the house as the years went by. The Whaley House was meant to stand as a triumph, a testament to ambition and progress in a young California town. And in many ways it did. But beneath the surface of prosperity, tragedy had already taken root. The death of baby Thomas Jr. left a mark on the family, and the uneasy sense of another presence, Yankee Jim's restless spirit, was never fully shaken. The Whaley House stood proud in Old Town, its brick walls catching the sun and its windows looking out over the bustle of a growing San Diego. To anyone walking by, it might have seemed a place of stability, a beacon of refinement. But within those walls, shadows stretched longer than daylight could reach. For the Whaley family, tragedy did not visit once and depart. It came in waves, each one crashing harder than the last, each one leaving scars that time could not heal. The loss of their infant son, Thomas Jr., had marked the first wound. His tiny cries had vanished into silence, leaving Anna hollowed by grief. The family pressed on, but sorrow had taken root, and soon more would follow. The Whaleys had several children, and their daughter Violet grew up surrounded by the ambitions of her father and the careful guidance of her mother. She was quiet, thoughtful, a young woman whose future, her parents hoped, would be of security and respectability. But in the mid-1880s, Violet's life took a turn that would end in devastation. At the age of 19, Violet married a man named George Bertolacci. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a promising match. But almost from the beginning, things went wrong. Bertolacci was not the partner Violet had imagined. Accounts suggest that he was dishonest, even cruel, and the marriage quickly collapsed. Within weeks, Violet was abandoned, not left with only heartbreak, but with the stigma that society of the time placed upon a woman whose marriage had failed. For Violet, the shame was unbearable. In an era when a woman's worth was tied so tightly to her role as wife and mother, the collapse of her marriage was more than personal disappointment. It was a public humiliation. Her despair deepened, and she withdrew into herself, moving like a shadow through the halls of the Whaley House. Family tried to comfort her, but sorrow had wrapped itself around her heart too tightly. On the morning of August 18th, 1885, Violet arose early. The house was quiet, bathed in the pale light of dawn. Somewhere within those walls she penned a final note, her words echoing with despair. Then she took her father's revolver, placed it to her chest, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the silence. The family rushed to her side, but there was nothing they could do. Violet died within the home, her life cut short at just 22 years old. Her suicide devastated the Whaleys. Anna never recovered from the loss of her daughter. Thomas, for all his ambition and pride, was broken by the tragedy. The echoes of that morning never faded from the house. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of the sadness that seemed to linger there, and visitors in later years would swear that Violet never left. Many have seen her drifting figure, dressed in white, her face pale and sorrowful. Others have felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of grief in certain rooms, as though the very air itself carries her despair. But Violet's death was not the only sorrow to strike the family. Over the years, more Whaley children would die within the home. Each passing left the house heavier, the walls absorbing grief upon grief. The Whaleys, once so full of ambition, seemed bound to their home not by